This has been a production of the Jamaica Information Service, the voice of Jamaica.
Tonight, we examine reports surrounding the National Solid Waste Management Authority and ask whether Jamaica is facing a wider erosion of professional standards inside public bodies. And teachers across Jamaica are wearing black as frustration grows over wages and retention pressures now facing the education system. Tonight, we also examine reports across the country as 4 directors of the National Solid Waste Management Authority are alleged to have been appointed without meeting minimum qualification requirements. Their combined annual salary, 43 million Jamaican dollars. Questions about qualifications inside state agencies are now raising larger concerns about governance, merit, and public trust. Then, while the state appoints the unqualified, the qualified are leaving. Jamaica ranks 3rd on the Global Human Flight and Brain Drain Index in 2026. So, younger Jamaicans are asking, if they get qualified, get educated, and still struggle for opportunity, what incentive is there to stay? Later, civil society groups are warning that a new Non-Profit Organizations Act is expected in October and could affect how they operate. They're now calling for greater consultation with the government. And the Jamaica Teachers Association has been in salary negotiations for over a year. Their contracts expired 12 months ago. Teachers across Jamaica are wearing black as frustration grows over wages, retention, and the pressures now facing the education system. I'm Jody Ann Quarry, and this is Lead Story. Good evening. We're now taking a look at the National Solid Waste Management Authority, the NSWMA. They're now at the center of a growing governance controversy, following reports that questions have been raised about the qualifications of some senior officials within the agency. Now, some of this is particularly significant because the NSWMA spent much of the last year promoting something they called Operation Reset, a reform initiative designed to modernize operations, improve efficiency, and strengthen service delivery. According to the reporting by Jamaica Gleaner, 4 senior directors managing portfolios including finance and administration are alleged to have been appointed without meeting the minimum qualification requirements for those roles. Those 4 positions carry a combined annual salary of approximately 43 million Jamaican dollars. That's taxpayers' money. The Gleaner has also reported that an irregular recruitment exercise at the NSWMA has triggered a 2-year impasse between the agency's executive director and its internal audit manager, a finding reached by the Ministry of Local Government and Community Development's own chief internal auditor. We're also hearing reports that people are in some of these top positions with only 3 CXCs. Now, the question that is being asked, though, by many, especially critics, is a different one. Because if an agency is promising institutional reform with that operation reform, what happens when questions emerge about the governance structure inside the very system that is supposed to deliver that reform? Now, We believe in allowing for the right of reply, and when you have an agency like this in the news, we wanted to make sure that we gave them the opportunity to speak with us. And so we contacted the National Solid Waste Management Authority's Executive Director, Audley Gordon. Earlier, when we spoke with him, his comment on the matter was that the audit is in the draft stage. Management responses are still being worked on. Now, this is not an issue that has been limited to the National Solid Waste Management Authority. Before this, we had these concerns being raised at the Jamaica Urban Transit Company and also at Petrojam, two organizations where governance issues had been highlighted and inappropriate qualifications for positions that persons held were also indicated. Now, this is something, as an audit report, is something that the management needs to consult on. But given the difficulties here, given that this is not the first time this issue has been raised, not only in the public sector, but also the NSWMA, we now want to make sure that we ventilate this issue inside Lead Story. Joining me now to discuss is political commentator Lloyd B. Smith. Lloyd B. Smith, thanks so much for joining us inside Lead Story.
You're most welcome. Happy to be on.
All right. We have Lloyd B. Smith on the phone with us. And so as we begin this conversation, I want to zoom out, taking a little view away from the particulars of this conversation about the NSWMA and look at the bigger picture. The Auditor General identified 6 unqualified senior managers at the Jamaica Urban Transit Company. That's one organization. The Petrojam scandal exposed governance failures at the board level there at Petrojam. Now, the National Solid Waste Management Authority, the NSWMA, is dealing with is dealing with this too. Are we looking at isolated breaches of one places, or are we looking at something that might rise to being a systemic pattern?
From all indications, it would appear that this has been par for the course. In other words, over these many decades in the civil service, there has been the tendency to employ persons more so based on their particular affiliations or connections rather than dealing specifically with the requirements for the job in terms of qualifications and experience. We are quite familiar with the term jobs for the boys and indeed girls. This may well be another such scenario unfolding. It's not a pretty picture because we are talking about taxpayers' money, and in this particular case, one wonders if it is felt that one doesn't have to have any meaningful qualifications to be in solid waste management. Is it that, as was being quoted in a previous conversation with a certain gentleman, does one need qualification to deal with garbage?
An unfortunate comment there, given that individuals would have needed to have seen a list of criteria for a person getting any of these jobs, especially with the combined annual salary for these 4 positions at the NSWMA being approximately 43 million Jamaican dollars. As you said, that's public money. What obligation did the NSWMA's board and their Human Resource Committee have to look at, and in general, boards of public bodies, to ensure competency standards are met?
Well, first of all, the various criteria for these posts need to be fully examined, and the board should be held accountable against that backdrop, as it should be seen whether or not the persons so employed, did they go through a process of interviewing which would have looked not only at their persona but at their qualifications and experience. It would appear that such issues may have been overlooked and that a sort of arbitrary selection process was adopted. And this would be setting and indeed is a dangerous precedent in the public service and should not be tolerated. I suspect that there ought to be very serious consequences if there has been this lapse in judgment, or shall we say, it is almost a case of not carrying out one's functions in a manner that is ethical and is prudent and is in the best interest of the taxpayer.
The best interest of the taxpayers is always what we're hoping for when public funds are being spent. But the corporate governance framework for public bodies requires that every senior role carry a documented competency profile. If those profiles existed, you wrote down what it is that you needed, you said that there were particular skills that you needed at the time of hire. How does an appointment like that doesn't meet the grade, they don't have the qualifications, they don't meet the criteria there, how does it get sustained for 2 years without correction, Lloyd B?
Well, obviously there has not been proper oversight, and it begs the question as to whether or not we are looking at a free-for-all system where, nothing is checked, there are no checks and balances, there's no proper oversight, which is where the board would have come in, and whoever is the chief operating or chief executive officer, whatever the title may be, ought to have been the person to ensure that there is due diligence. Obviously, there was none of that. And so it begs the question as to whether or not are there any acts of cronyism or favoritism, or just, as I said earlier, jobs for the boys. There's also the ugly scenario that has been played out in the public service for years, whereby persons are sometimes selected based on their particular political persuasion.
This is an unfortunate situation indeed, but this is also a morale question, Lloyd B. Smith. What message does this send to career public servants or younger professionals who spent years qualifying for roles and are now seeing individuals who are not meeting the criteria, unqualified for these positions, then going home with hefty salaries?
It's very discouraging because over these many years we have seen a shift in young persons' ambitions. There was a time when a lot of our young people just didn't bother getting, a degree, a first degree or even a second degree. They would have left secondary high school and say, let me just get a job or, or something of that kind. But there has been a specific trend where our young persons, many of them, have gone out of their way, made sacrifices and so on along with their parents, to ensure that they have a very good education background on the basis that they want to get a job that will pay well, hopefully, and will put them on a career path. So this sort of scenario does not encourage that kind of situation at all. It is, on the other hand, discouraging, because what we are being told here is that, hey, you don't need to have any such qualifications. As long as whoever interviews you likes you or thinks that you are the kind of person they want based on whatever other, characteristics or whatever else you come with.
And I think that's deeply unfortunate at this time. We do hope that there are some accountability mechanisms in place after this audit is completed. Political commentator Lloyd B. Smith, thank you so much for joining us inside Lead Story.
You're most welcome. Have a wonderful evening.
The very same to you. We'll take a short break. When we return, Jamaica ranks third on the Global Brain Drain Index. The qualified are leaving. And tonight we ask, why?
internationally acclaimed On Stage with Winford Williams.
At a new time, Saturdays at 8 p.m. on CVM TV.
So much more than entertainment.
Jamaica's unemployment rate has fallen to 3.3%, down from 13.2% in 2016. Our government's continued focus on job creation is delivering real results. We are building Jamaica. The time by the Office of the Prime Minister is...
Hi, I am Candy Pang.
What a guan?
What a guan?
That a guan, pa.
What a guan? What a guan?
What a guan? Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays at 8 a.m., 1:30 p.m., and 10 p.m. on CVM TV.
That's a guan, pa. What a guan?
Brought to you by
Some things are perfect from the start. Smirnoff.
For years, young Jamaicans have been told that education is a pathway to opportunity. So they did everything right. They sat the exams, they earned the degrees, they entered the workforce. We told them to get qualified, get certified, work hard, contribute to the country. But many younger professionals now say they're watching stories about governance failures, appointment controversies, and limited opportunity, while struggling themselves to find stable professional pathways of their own. Jamaica's score on the Human Flight and Brain Drain Index in 2026 is 9.2 out of 10. The world average is 4.98. The only countries above Jamaica are Samoa and Palestine. One is a remote Pacific island nation. The other is a territory under active military operation. Jamaica is neither. And yet, here we are. Jamaica continues to lose teachers, nurses, doctors, and other skilled professionals to migration. So tonight we ask, what happens when educated young Jamaicans no longer believe the system rewards competence fairly? With me now is economic consultant Janelle McEwen. Janelle, thanks so much for joining us inside Lead Story.
Good night. Thank you for having me.
Janelle, Jamaica has spent decades telling young people to get educated, get qualified, and to contribute. What happens when many of them feel that they've done exactly the things that they were told to do and they still can't access opportunity?
Well, when we see a system that is mainly based on connections rather than competence, then the next best thing for us is to leave. We would have believed that the golden ticket maker would have been great education, do some voluntary service, and then you'll be on your way. But unfortunately, that is not the case. If you don't know someone, you'll get left behind.
That's deeply concerning, especially as someone who would often have taken loans to go into higher education or to get qualified. And that matters because Jamaica ranks third on the Global Human Flight and Brain Drain Index in 2026, scoring 9.2 out of 10 against the world average of 4.8. The countries ahead of us, Janelle, are in active conflict or extreme poverty. What does then that say about Jamaica's institutional environment that we rank in that company?
It is really sad to note. And, of recent, I did an investigative series or research in Montego Bay, middle class being priced out of the future. And I shared some of these details of the likelihood for persons to immigrate, and the results were really alarming. Around 96% they were willing to emigrate in order to get a better job. So what we would have seen over the years is that approximately 80% of persons with tertiary level education emigrate. In 2022, we have around 6,000 teachers that left on J1 visa. So the statistics is really something that have been taking us years, and we have done very little to really change that, because what we see would have happened over the years is that we're having a question about productivity. Yet still, the persons who really and truly can change it, I don't believe that the jobs are being offered to them, or it's a case where when they leave school, it's really, really difficult to get in some of these positions because we're not so qualified or we don't have the experience, you know. But maybe, just maybe, if we're in school and we get probably just over 3 subjects, we should be on our way.
This is then a concern for many Jamaicans watching what's going on right now, but the reality is even more stark. You have talked about that research there in Montego Bay, St. James here in Jamaica. There's other research that we have seen here at Lead Stories saying sixth formers, when asked, about 60% of them said they're willing to leave this country after sixth form. We also have another 60% of Jamaica's 2023 nursing cohort. Well, they went overseas as well, lost to overseas recruitment. These are not the people who failed to qualify, Janelle. They qualified.
Right.
These are all qualified, and they have left. Are we now dealing with a return on education crisis where some Jamaicans no longer believe the sacrifice of university or professional training is paying off locally?
Well, that is the case, and with the rising cost of living for many Jamaicans, what you find is that even with the public sector reform, one of the biggest in history that would have taken place under Minister Nigel Clarke's tenure, you would have seen that the outpace the cost of living. So while salaries for many public sector workers would have been improved, what we're seeing is that the cost of living crisis that we're currently experiencing, especially in the middle class, they're being squeezed so much till they're thinking that the next best alternative is for them to either migrate or emigrate in order to, with that, we call it a better life. And it's really sad that we're, again, on the point of, are we near the Prime Minister calling for persons to be patriotic to Jamaica and we should work and develop our country and build our country. But when we look at things like this that is happening at the National Solid Waste Management Authority, we have to stop for a moment and think like, what is really happening here? Directors don't have minimum qualification, yet still they're earning millions of dollars per year. And when we, the younger ones, leave with our degrees, with very much great GPAs, we can hardly even get a level 3 position in some of these government agencies. So it's really, really, really sad.
It's sad, but it also has a cost. You're an economist. What's the economic cost of us being the ones who train people who can't find them jobs, who, as you said, they might have difficulties getting into the government service or getting private sector jobs that match their competence? What's the economic cost now of training people and then having them decide that those qualifications that we, the Jamaican taxpayers, have paid for don't make sense here, but they'll have to take it elsewhere?
Well, what we have to first acknowledge is that Jamaica is a country that, right? And when the tax base shrinks, when people are leaving, what happens is that we have less persons working in the system. So that will affect the economy at large. And when we have our most qualified, as the stats show you with the brain draining, around 80% of persons with tertiary level education are leaving the country. And that says a lot. These are the people with the competence, the people who can put productivity and drive economic growth. So it is not surprising that we're having a productivity issue in Jamaica. So that is what will happen. We'll start to see that when people leave, is that the economy will start growing, productivity will slow, and we will start to grow at a slow rate. And that is what we have been experiencing for the last decade or so.
You did speak a few moments ago about the crisis at the National Solid Waste Management Authority, something that is now in the public domain. Persons are now watching, with information coming into the public domain through an audit reported by the Gleaner, that individuals there not qualified for the positions that they hold, but taking home millions of dollars. When you're a young Jamaican graduate looking at something like this and wondering whether your qualifications matter as you're watching something like this, what's the honest economic answer that you give to that person who says, I'm watching all of this, it doesn't look like anything that will happen for me in the next 20, 30 years, I might need to go and build a life elsewhere or do something else?
What I say to them is that when you're in university, make sure you network, make sure you know someone. That is really important, as It really does help, as you can see. So my first thought or my first suggestion will not say to leave, right? Even though if that is an option one won't wish to take, then that is on them. There are opportunities here. It's just really, really difficult to get, and it will come down. It will come down to who you know. Unfortunately, that is the case, and as it even today, we would have heard that an additional 3 more regional managers they would have found did not meet the qualifications, and they would have been earning big money just the same. So what I'll say is that we, as a country, we have to do something about this. It has been happening for years. We would have seen a situation at the UTC before, where approximately 63% of their staff did not meet necessary qualifications, nor did the job be posted for interviews, etc. So we have to really move away from this. And we don't just want reports, and then no action behind it. We have to have some action behind these reports that we're seeing, and we have to demand more from our legislators and our politicians. And that's where it really comes down to, because we don't want to continue to lose our best talents to foreign countries. I believe that we can facilitate and we can cultivate that Jamaica. We all want to see we stand up for what is right.
Janelle McEwen, you've spoken about needing to know people, and there is a degree of networking, getting to know people, building out connections that one is expected to do, whether it is that you're in high school or beyond. But what does it do to national productivity, something that we've been having many conversations about, and social trust, when people believe connections matter more than competence here in Jamaica?
Yeah, the trust will be eroded, as we would have seen. From many persons don't even bother to apply to some of these agencies because of how difficult it is to really get into some of these organizations. And on the point of networking, it is always important because a lot of time you have the competence, right? And it is because of the network as to what brings you to the table to give it a shot. And we know that shortlisting period, etc., is one that tedious and outdated for many government agencies. However, on the point of productivity, what we're seeing now is that many university high school graduates, they are leaving now and they have to set up jobs they don't have there's a mismatch in skill set, and that in itself also helps to reduce productivity.
And Janelle McEwen, one of the accusations or one of the allegations in the audit report was that even if you score the highest, even if you are the most qualified there, you might not get the job. So is that part of then the larger context as well?
Very much so. So it's a very,
Janelle McEwen? We're unable to hear you clearly a moment ago as you're talking to us about that larger context with persons there. Just, are you back with us?
Yes, I am.
Yes.
Are you hearing me now?
Yes.
Okay, so even with the larger context, what we would have seen is that this kind of human resource activity that is happening at the National Solid Waste Management Authority, it is quite interesting because the people who are hiring, right, they're saying to themselves that, okay, let's give these people the benefit of the doubt. Let's say they don't have the qualification, but we're going to employ them because they're competent. And if we should look around and see the job that the National Solid Waste Management has been doing, it is way below par, and it's mind-boggling to say the least. For an agency or an organization to be operating with such poor efficiency and effectiveness, and yet still they're hiring people without the basic minimum qualification. It's a grave concern.
A concern, especially then, since you've added then the output that Jamaican taxpayers would be receiving, paying these large salaries, but an output that does not make us completely happy. Janelle McEwen, certainly helpful conversation there, not only putting us at the end there in the mindset of what do you get when people don't have qualifications, but also reminding us of what people give up when they leave this country. Thanks so much for joining us inside Lead Story. Up next, Jamaica civil society groups say new legislation could affect how they operate. Are democratic safeguards strong enough? We talk about that when we return.
I fly again like a jet plane. Headed straight in your direction. 'Cause I'm wiser, one step closer. I'm winning 'cause I work so hard. And the music keeps on playing, and the people them I say we are mash up the dance. Oh, what a feeling! Don't stop dreaming. Keep on believing in the power of the feeling. Whatever you want, take a chance. Song in your heart, step in your dance. You got a spark, don't fit it dark, shine your lights on.
Jamaica, make we do the right thing. Make we live good today for a better tomorrow. Talk it out, don't fight it out. The time by the Ministry of National Security is
6:30. Let's delve deep into the issues. We'll take you beneath the surface.
Greetings and salutations. My name is Orville Higgins, and it's another edition of Fan Central.
Talking to the people at the heart of the top sporting stories. Hear from your favorite sportsmen and women and the administrators who work tirelessly to make it all happen. It's live sports talk.
I've written an entire article.
Yes.
Looking at all the major issues every Tuesday at 9 p.m. It's Fan Central.
Civil society organizations across Jamaica are now calling for greater consultation over proposed legislative changes affecting non-profit organizations. These organizations deliver disaster response, education, social protection, youth development, and community resilience work across this island. They are, in many cases, doing what the government cannot or does not do. The government is expected to introduce a new Non-Profit Organizations Act in October of this year. The stated purpose is modernization of the regulatory framework. But civil society leaders are warning that without structured, inclusive consultation, the law risks undermining the very organizations it seeks to regulate. The concern from advocacy groups is not necessarily whether legislation and regulation should exist. They're okay with that. But rather whether the process, the consultation, and the final structure of the law could create operational pressures for non-governmental organizations and community organizations. But critics warn that poorly designed frameworks can sometimes narrow democratic participation or discourage advocacy work. Joining me now are Mrs. Nancy Pinhas, Executive Director of the Council for Voluntary and Social Services, and Mrs. Tanya Chambers, Legal Consultant to the CVSS. Good evening and welcome to you both inside Lead Story.
Good evening. Thanks for having us.
Good evening.
We're having a conversation this evening about the government, Mrs. Pinhas, and the expected introduction of a new Non-Profit Organizations Act in October of this year. Your organization, the CVSS, estimates that donations to registered Jamaican charities exceeded $40 billion, that's a big one, dollars in 2021. What's at stake for the Jamaican people if this piece of legislation that will clearly be important is poorly designed?
Just to clarify, that number came from a 2021 report done by the Department of Charities and Friendly Societies. So it was picked up by the CVSS. It wasn't compiled by the CVSS. But it has very important implications. We actually started this work in late 2024. We formed a joint advocacy forum, and it was determined by a cross-section of civil society organizations, our member organizations and a variety of organizations, that it was necessary to have a coordinated mechanism to review the policy and the legislation surrounding civil society. Subsequent to this, upon Tanya completing her legal analysis and making recommendations, we were advised late 2025 that in fact the Charities Act of 2013 was going to be revamped is not the word. They're not going to use that anymore, and they're creating what is called a Non-Profit Organization Act. What we are now asking for, having done all the work and the analysis and understanding very clearly what the sector needs, because we have had consultations with a variety of interest groups throughout civil society, broad consultations, as well as the deeper analysis. And Tanya has undertaken comparative research of what prevails in comparative OECD countries on what the legislation should look like. And it is important, as you said, one, if in 2021 it was 40 billion, back-to-back hurricanes, Beryl and Melissa, in 24 and 25, that number would be substantially more significant. And in a country like Jamaica, that has a deep historic relationship with volunteerism, it's entrenched in our culture, it's entrenched in our society, it's entrenched in our psyche, to be able to have legislation that supports this plethora of organizations in a way that enables them to really achieve and reach beneficiaries that we all know the government of Jamaica would never be able to reach given our limited and tight budget. So I can't stress any further, aside from emergency response, the ongoing activities in health, education, gender, disabilities, etc., that civil society feels a gap in.
You feel that gap in those areas, youth development, social protection work. You're doing work that the government cannot or does not do. If we're seeing a situation where the administrative burdens in this act are too much, just don't allow then for these organizations that are working to keep working in these ways. Does the government have the ability to soak up the extra work that now would be created if these civil society organizations no longer existed?
So what really is also important, and you need to understand about civil societies are organizations that are, especially the grassroots organizations, is that they have a deep understanding of their communities and their community needs. It's a very bottom-up driven design of services to enable to meet their needs. A government, and just by the very nature of its structure, would never be able to have that intimate relationship with the beneficiaries as much as they could make efforts to. And therefore, civil societies are very efficient and effective agents to deliver assistance in poverty alleviation, health, education. I mean, we saw what happened with something like Melissa, where there was no communication. Civil society organizations, the churches in particular, because they were in the communities, were able to relay information out to those communities and serve individuals, families, on a very personal, needs-based manner. So, I mean, that was just an emergency situation, but as an ongoing type of organization, they are best placed to meet the needs.
So the government then cannot or would not be best placed then, if they don't serve in these places, to be able to take over those responsibilities. Nancy, Tanya Chambers, you're also here with us, legal consultant to the CVSS, and Nancy would have made reference to the work that you would have done, taking a look at the legislative overview that currently exists. Where are we right now? Help us understand, because the Charities Act of 2013 and its 2022 regulations have already been described as burdensome, and that's despite it being an improvement. Where does this new piece of legislation now that's under consideration potentially take us?
Well, we want to be clear that we haven't actually seen the content of the NPO Act. We're working.
Hold on, Tanya, why not?
Well, as far as we know, it isn't yet available. Perhaps the draft isn't yet complete, etc. But of course, we have to make our advocacy statements based on what we understand to be the risks that already exist with the Charities Act. And if we continue along this train, which, every indication is that what the NPO Act will effectively do is expand the reach of the types of incursions made under the Charities Act to a much wider berth of organizations without fixing some of the underlying gaps and deficiencies that affect how civil society organizations do what they do on a day-to-day basis.
Tanya, you use words like incursions, which have a very sort of militaristic, moving in sort of idea behind it. And you're also talking about a piece of legislation that you have not yet seen, even though we've been told that it's expected now to be passed in October of this year. The sorts of legislative changes that are expected, you say, require advocacy in advance. What are you hearing as statements that you then have to make sure that you push back against, or at least make representations saying that's not the best way?
So our pushback actually begins in the existing legislation. With the existing legislation, the Charities Act in particular, the regulations passed more recently
2022
creates a scheme around protected charities. And with that scheme, a number of Jamaican organizations, otherwise legitimate organizations, have been identified using global markers of what a red flag ought to look like as high-risk entities. This kind of designation has limited organizations from being able to do their work effectively, from being able to raise funds, from being able to have what you'd consider a regularized or compliant status, because they're showing up as high risk. Some of the risk factors that have been introduced in our law include things like getting donations from outside of your country, having board members who are living in another country. Now, in another state, that might be considered an anomaly, but given Jamaica's level of relationship with our diaspora communities, that kind of a thing is par for the course for many organizations. So one of the things that we're asking is, as we develop the law, whether the one that we have existing or what is to come, we move towards a scenario where our administrative systems are based on the risks that exist in our country, and that we move away from cookie cutter approaches where we're using international or global markers of risks that really are not quite relevant in our local scenarios.
At the same time, though, Tanya, globally governments have used transparency and money laundering frameworks as a stated basis for tighter NGO regulation, saying, for example, countries like Hungary, looking at their legislation, they had said in particular, you know what, if the money is coming from outside the country, that means that we're getting voices and ideas from outside of the country that are not aligned with our local reality, and we don't want them here. Now, the European Court of Justice ruled against that in 2021, but that's still something that's used. Why is it that you don't believe that that might be relevant here in Jamaica and that this act shouldn't have it in there?
I think this is something that is so constant in our Jamaican society. We know as a society, let's take away the organizations. As a society in general, we have remittances as such a significant portion of our economy. We have diaspora groups representing such a significant voice in national development. There is no reason why non-profits should be singled out for having partnerships outside of the country in the way that we're suggesting from a regulation.
And I think that raising that is important. Nancy Pinhas, hearing now from Tanya, hearing her put on the table what everybody else gets to have that NGOs don't get to have now. You have said that consultation isn't just desirable, it's essential. We're in this legislative process where Tanya says we don't have a piece of legislation to look at. We don't have this draft to look at everything. If that is where we are, what must happen before October in order for us to have a piece of legislation that makes the most sense?
Well, I think as Tanya alluded to, what would be ideal is to, if they don't have a draft at this stage, just to have an understanding of what the principal elements. We would also like to see whether or not the registration process, which is a dual registration system, is that going to prevail? Are they still going to require registration at company's office and then at the charities office. So some very straightforward, even structural pieces of the legislation must be contemplated at this stage if we're looking at October. You know, we have submitted through the ministry Tanya's legal analysis and recommendations. So we are really anticipating that they will take this into consideration, but we've not really had a formal response. And again, it really would be ideal to have the organizations that are so fundamental to how this country functions. We are the third sector. It really would not be ideal to create another act that is not proportionate, not proportionately applied to different sizes and scales of organizations, that inhibits organizations' ability to function, to obtain funding.
And I think that is important too, that context, that wider context in which civil society fills these gaps and fills these roles, that you've made it very clear that the government
can't. And if they're not careful, what you'll do is impose additional regulations, and that organizations will not be able to fulfill or meet. And therefore, what you will create is a situation where there are charities who are unregulated, so to speak, which there probably are quite a fair amount of.
But we don't want to incentivize and create that here.
We don't want that. We want everybody in the fold. We want everybody to operate in a transparent way, with
transparent, legal and accountable way, making sure that all donable funds that we receive now are accounted for. This is certainly something that we'll continue to keep an eye on. Nancy Pinhas and Tanya Chambers, thank you so very much for joining us and speaking about this Inside Lead Story.
Thank you very much for
your support. When we return, teachers across Jamaica wearing black as frustration grows over pay, retention and conditions within the profession. That's up next.
Change does not happen overnight. It takes vision, commitment, and courage to reform.
So we created a number of executive agencies, which I believe, and I can say, having left this thing, was one of the most successful initiatives undertaken in the reform process.
But transformation isn't easy.
We found in several ministries, agencies, and departments, you had square pegs in round holes.
You could almost say that public sector transformation is not a JLP policy, it's not a PNP policy. It is national policy.
There was political willingness, there was bipartisan support for going through with the reforms, there was societal support, a lot of societal sacrifices. People of Jamaica made a lot of sacrifices. And businesses, the private sector, everybody was engaged in this journey.
We want to continue to reform the public sector, to allow the public sector to provide its services to the Jamaican people, provide services to the private sector. And the idea is that those services must be more accessible. Those services must be more affordable. Those services must be faster. They must be more personable and comfortable for the citizen.
Watch Building a Better Public Sector, a 4-part docuseries right here on CVM, commencing April 5 and aired every Sunday in April at 3 p.m. Brought to you by the Transformation Implementation Unit.
Teachers across Jamaica are today wearing black as the Jamaica Teachers Association continues to press the government over wages and compensation. The action follows a public dispute over whether the JTA responded to an earlier salary offer made by the government. The Jamaica Teachers Association says its members are experiencing deep frustration, exhaustion, and growing impatience. The Ministry of Finance has now invited the JTA to a negotiation meeting. But the JTA has warned if that meeting does not produce meaningful progress, the matter goes to the membership to determine next steps. With me now is Mark Malava, President of the Jamaica Teachers Association. President Malava, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Why did JTA decide that wearing black was necessary at this stage of the negotiations, President?
Well, in essence, it's a show of solidarity. We recognize that the members are very much restive and concerned about their own affairs. And we believe at this time that there is a need to send a message, albeit somewhat symbolic, but the message needs to be sent.
Symbolic message, deep concerns. Minister Favour Williams stated last week on her social media X platform page that the association had not responded to an offer made in February. The JTA says it rejected the offer early March. How did that communication breakdown occur?
I am not certain as to why or how that communication, how did that occur. We know that we had sent that communication to the minister. I can't speak to why at this point in time as to why that communication breakdown took place, but we can confirm that we sent it to the minister.
All right, you sent it to the minister. What specifically then is the JTA seeking from the government at this stage?
Well, of course, we are not going to negotiate in public. There are some key items on our list of claims that we believe are fundamental to the concerns of the teachers, that are fundamental to the education system as a whole. And we are going into those negotiations with the clearest of intentions to say to the government in no uncertain terms that these are our deal breakers, and if we don't have them, we essentially won't have a deal.
All right, they're so fundamental that you need to have them, but it appears the Ministry of Finance invited the JTA to the meeting after the black protest action was announced. Is that accurate?
No, well, not entirely accurate. The reality is that there was a growing level of agitation amongst our members. And as the days went by, it became more and more obvious that the members were extremely restive. The ministry indicated to us, as well, sent a communication to us on Saturday of a willingness to convene a meeting. They indicated that they wanted that meeting on Friday. We rejected that to say the urgency of the situation demanded an earlier meeting. We proposed Monday. The Ministry of Finance indicated that the minister would have been unavailable at that time due to cabinet, and we settled on a date for Tuesday at 8:30 a.m.
So tomorrow morning, bright and early, you should be then having this meeting. Do you? Yeah. What is the hope? That it will produce different results from previous engagements that you've had with the ministry, especially as they've been trying to tease out this latest wage latest wage offer?
Indeed. The unfortunate thing is that since the start of the academic year, we have really only had one meeting with the Minister of Finance with respect to wage negotiations and advancing those negotiations, so to speak. We had another meeting, however, with the Ministry of Education to treat with matters that were deemed to be local and germane to the education system. So that is where we are with it. Again, I would indicate that there are some critical points of concern, and we would have formally written to the Ministry of Finance on these points of concern to indicate to them that these are going to be our priority coming into the meeting tomorrow.
All right. What then does the JTA need to see in the coming days to believe that these negotiations are moving in a serious and constructive direction rather than this sort of gap talking back and forth?
Yeah, so here's where we are. We are in year 2 of a proposed 3-year wage negotiations, and how our internal systems operate is that by the end of this year, we would have to start putting together a new list of claims, yeah? and that new list of claims is going to be coming at a period where we may not have completed the negotiations. And we are saying in no uncertain terms that for us is untenable. We have indicated to the government that there are some deal breakers for us. Again, these deal breakers are anchored into research, they're anchored into reports, they're anchored into best practices. And we are saying to the government that if they are serious about advancing the cause of education, then they have to treat with us. For us, we maintain that for us it is not merely a fight for increased salaries and conditions of service. For us, it's really a fight for social justice. Our teachers, Jody, are amongst the lowest paid in the Caribbean, as indicated in one of the latest CAPRA reports. Yeah, our teachers are amongst the lowest paid in the Caribbean, yet we have been called upon to carry out the functions of education in a very significant way. And what I would say as well is that our teachers have performed above and beyond the cause of duty.
And that is what you need to then see from the Ministry of Finance, some compensation and some communication then that recognizes the seriousness of the work that you do and honors that at the negotiating table. Well, we will continue to keep up with you on this.
We are nation builders and we need to be treated as nation builders.
Mark Malava, President of the Jamaica Teachers Association, thank you so much for speaking with us inside Lead Story. That's it. I mean, this is the big conversation. Do people believe the system is fair? That's every single conversation that we had tonight. But I'm Jody Ann Quarry, and that's it for today's edition of Lead Story. On behalf of the entire CVM production team, have a fantastic evening, and I hope you stay safe. Up next, CVM News.